Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, and we begin today with the major breakthrough in the war in the Middle East. President Trump announcing Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of a peace deal that would stop the fighting in the Gaza Strip and release all remaining hostages, living and deceased, potentially as soon as Monday or Tuesday. Moments ago, President Trump hosted the president of Finland in the Oval Office, taking a victory lap on the deal.
I think it's going to be a day of great celebration. I've never seen anything like it. The streets of so many countries right now, they're just roaring with love and with praise for the people that did this. And these are countries that did this. The whole world came together for this, even Iran.
It follows the president's meeting with his cabinet earlier today, where he celebrated phase one of the deal and what it could mean for the entire region.
As you know, last night we reached a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East, something that people said was never going to be done. We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. And I think it's going to be a lasting peace, hopefully an everlasting peace. So we look forward to welcoming the hostages, like you can't believe, home to their families, and that'll take place early next week. We hope Monday or Tuesday. And all Americans should be proud of the role that our country has played in bringing this terrible conflict to an end.
In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu met with his security cabinet to discuss the details. An Israeli government spokesperson says the ceasefire will go into effect once the wider government convenes and approves the deal. Meanwhile, take a look. These were the scenes in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv today, where people gathered to celebrate the news, waving Israeli flags, singing, dancing, and embracing one another. Similar scenes broke out in the Gaza Strip. People were clapping and cheering in the streets, celebrating what they hope will be the end of hostilities in the war-torn enclave. A spokesperson for Hamas also touting the deal, saying the end of the war has been a central and fundamental goal. But serious questions do remain about the future of the Gaza Strip and the specific implementation of this deal, including what kind of security guarantees are needed to make sure that this fragile deal holds up and that both sides live up to their agreements. And then what does phase one of the deal look like if the countries get there? What it will take to rebuild Gaza, who will govern, and what it will take to fully disarm Hamas. Here's what President Trump said today about what comes next.
But what is phase two? When does it begin?
I'm not going to talk about that because you sort of know what phase two is, but there will be disarming, there will be pullbacks, there will be a lot of things that are happening. You know, I gave you a whole list of 22 different things that will take place. And I think it'll take place, and I think you're going to end up with peace in the Middle East.
What is your view now on a two-state solution for the...
I don't have a view. I'm going to go with what they agree to.
Joining me now is Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel in Jerusalem and NBC News White House Correspondent Monica Alba from the White House. Richard, I have to go to you first. Israel's government is expected to approve the deal. Can you walk us through what comes next and why this is such a fragile agreement?
So as of this moment, while we're speaking right now, the government has not formally approved the deal. It was supposed to have met several times earlier today. There have been delays after delays, but it seems that progress is still going ahead. There is no real doubt in this country that the deal will be canceled, or there are no doubts that the deal will be stopped. Just a short while ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu's office put out a statement that Prime Minister Netanyahu was meeting with President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Israeli media report that the three of them, the two American envoys and the Prime Minister, went in to meet the larger government. So we could be approaching a formal approval from the Israeli government quite soon. But like I said, the fact that the Israelis were going to approve this was never really in doubt. You could see the scenes in Hostage Square today. You can feel a different mood on the streets of Israel, and a palpable change in Gaza as well. People were dancing in the streets of Tel Aviv. Hostage Square, which for 2 years has been synonymous with mourning, with sadness, where meetings have been held in support of the hostages. Today, people were waving Israeli flags, American flags, handing out fresh-baked cookies. I saw several people dressed like President Trump. And in Gaza, also people took to the streets to celebrate the end of this war, the end of Israeli strikes. But as we're speaking right now, the strikes in Gaza have not completely stopped. There was a strike, according to local military officials, just a short while ago, killing at least 4 Palestinians. Israeli troops have not pulled back from populated areas. The ceasefire has not officially begun yet, but the wide expectation is that it's going to be approved tonight. The ceasefire kicking in tomorrow, and the hostages coming in, being released sometime after that, potentially over the weekend, or as President Trump said, early in the week.
So, Richard, you heard one of the correspondents there pressing President Trump on phase 2. So phase 1, the release of the hostages, Israel moving its battle lines back. Talk a little bit about how you anticipate this will unfold and what is the key step that has to happen after that.
So the sequence of events here are being discussed at this moment, and that is why I think we're seeing these 11th hour discussions, 11th hour negotiations, because in addition to the release of the hostages, the pullback of Israeli troops to predetermined lines, Israel also must free hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. That is part of the deal, and Israeli media report that disagreements over some of the names of Palestinian prisoners. So that is part of this process as well. Once, and there's, like I said, there's no anticipation that this is going to fall apart. It's still delicate. Then we would move to phase 2, which is the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, a new government, replacing Hamas, which has been in power for 20 years in Gaza. President Trump's plan talked about replacing Hamas with a government of experts, apolitical technocrats. But so far, we have not seen any list of names. They have not been presented to Palestinians. There's also talk about replacing Hamas as a security force with another security force, potentially an Arab force, an international military, a coalition. But that force has not been assembled. They are not poised to move into the Gaza Strip. So this could take not just weeks, but this could take months.
Yeah, and still so many pieces of this that have to come together, as you have continued to stress throughout all of your reporting. Richard Engel, thank you so much for joining us from Jerusalem. Monica, Alba, let me turn to you at the White House. Take us behind the scenes. You've been talking to your sources. Walk us through the final moments of how this peace deal actually came together. It was quite quick in the end.
Yeah, exactly, Kristen. And a lot of this momentum was very clear to White House officials during the UN General Assembly week. I'm told that was really key, and we even heard that echoed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio in terms of that meeting that the president had with those Arab leaders in terms of getting them to sign off on that 20-point peace plan. Their support, I'm told, was essential to this, and they thought that having that locked in, of course, before Prime Minister Netanyahu then came to the White House, also backed the deal. That was critical. And the way that all of the diplomacy played out around Israel's apology in the form of that call from Prime Minister Netanyahu to Qatar over the strike that Israel had launched into Doha. Those moments, I'm told, were really key, and those all did take place in the last 10 days or so. And then you had President Trump, who was feeling very optimistic in the last couple of days. Remember, of course, he had given Hamas that deadline. They responded. And then it was ultimately sending Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to the region to participate in these talks and finalize some of the details. And of course, we all saw just 24 hours ago how that really interesting moment played out with the note from Secretary Rubio to President Trump in order to announce the deal. And I'm told that specifically after all of that happened, the president was the one who wanted to be able to deliver some of this new detail and some of the news to the hostage families themselves, which we saw through a phone call. And that photo that you just put up on the screen is what's happening today and tonight in Israel in terms of Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, who are meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu again to iron out some of the finer details that still need to be worked out. But this is a White House and a West Wing that is feeling very good about the way this has played out so far, while, of course, a bit trepidatious on what comes next. But overall, the president is extremely proud, he says, of his team, and he is also giving himself a lot of the credit for the art of the peace deal in his mind and the way that he was able to bring the parties to the negotiating table.
You're
Kristen.
absolutely right, Monica. There was no shortage of talk and questions about a Nobel Peace Prize. We know he's been talking about that. Let me ask you, because he also discussed visiting the region. What are you going to be watching for there?
It sounds like the president indicated he wants to be in Egypt for an official signing ceremony of this peace plan, but we don't know exactly when that would happen. He says they're working out the final details, and we know he has been invited to also address Israel's parliament, the Knesset, and he said he would accept that invitation, so likely a trip to Israel as well. Again, they're working on all of that, and it is coming down hour by hour, Kristen, to see if it can all materialize.
Monica, Alba, thank you for that great reporting from the White House. We really appreciate it. Joining me now is former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren. Ambassador Oren, thank you so much for joining me. We really appreciate it. Let's dive right into this, because this is a hugely significant development. How are you viewing this? Obviously, this is phase one, but how big of a development is this?
First of all, Kristen, great to be with you. It's a very special day, a very emotional day for all of us in Israel. This is an extraordinary accomplishment. Just as a work of diplomacy, it's extremely elegant. And if you would have asked me if it was possible 2 weeks ago, I probably would have said no way. To get all of these disparate countries that don't agree with one another, it's the Turks and the Qataris that don't necessarily get along with the Saudis and the Emiratis, and much less with the state of Israel, to get them all on the same page around 20 very complex points that address not only the situation in Gaza, but the entire situation in the Middle East, with Israel, the West Bank, the entire region, is quite extraordinary, even in historic terms. And it's really a product of the president's willingness to use power in the Middle East, strong power, which gave him tremendous leverage by using military power against Yemen, the Houthis, and then against Iran. That gets you respect in the Middle East, and also the personal relationships that have been developed by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. We're able to really harness those relationships. And of course, with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has visited the Oval Office now multiple times. Quite extraordinary. But having said all that, this is maybe the end of the beginning of the end of the war, and certainly with the return of the hostages, which will be just overwhelming for the people of Israel, and the end of fighting in Gaza, which will be overwhelming for the Palestinians in Gaza. But still, the big linchpin, and I think that Richard Engel was right when he mentioned this earlier in his reporting, the linchpin here is the disarmament of Hamas, because all the subsequent steps, including the formation of an international force that's going to come in and reconstruct Gaza, they won't do that. No country's going to send forces to the Gaza if Hamas still has guns, and if it's still a war zone. So that is going to be really the next crucial step. To accomplish that without military pressure, there has to be political pressure brought on those countries, those regimes that are close to Hamas, particularly in Turkey and in Qatar.
And to the skeptics who, to that very point, Ambassador Oren, say they are concerned Hamas may never fully lay down its weapons, may never fully disarm. What say you, and is there enough teeth in this deal to make sure that they do?
That's an excellent question, and I think that it's true. It goes to the DNA of Hamas. Hamas is a jihadist organization. Hamas without guns is really not Hamas anymore. It's like saying Al-Qaeda or ISIS without guns is ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And so it's going to take a tremendous amount of diplomacy again, and pressure. And pressure by those Middle Eastern governments that do have influence over Hamas to get them to relinquish those weapons. According to the 20 points, those Hamas leaders who do not want to accept peace with Israel, to live peacefully in Gaza, can leave the Gaza Strip. It's fine. We're happy to see them go, and we don't care where they go. But that is going to be the true test of these 20 points.
You know, it's interesting. In a statement, the IDF chief of staff instructed all forces to, quote, prepare strong defenses and be ready for any scenario. Big picture, not just as it relates to Hamas, but overall, because there are so many different pieces to this. What is your level of confidence that the ceasefire will hold?
I think it will hold in the main. I think Israel will observe the ceasefire. You have to understand that we have a great number of troops in the Gaza Strip, and they're very exposed, and they have been attacked in the last 24 hours. They're going to defend themselves. But having said that, Israel has ceased all offensive operations in Gaza, and I think they'll accord with the withdrawal agreements between Israel and the United States. I haven't seen that map, but there are going to be significant withdrawals. Not entirely. There will be Israeli forces that will remain in significant different strategic locations within Gaza. But keep in mind, this has been a conflict not just between Israel and Hamas. It's between Israel and Iran and Iran's proxies throughout the region. The Houthi rebels continued to fire at Israel. Hezbollah remains a force in Lebanon, much degraded, but still a force there. Iran-backed militias in Syria and Iraq that have repeatedly fired at American bases there. And Iran is rebuilding its capabilities, and we have to keep a very strong, vigilant eye on Iran, lest Iran once again causes instability and destruction throughout the entire Middle East.
Let me ask you finally, Ambassador, today Prime Minister Netanyahu posted on X an AI-generated image of the president with a caption, quote, "He deserves it," referencing the Nobel Peace Prize. There's the image right there. What is your view on this? Do you think, do officials in Israel think that he does in fact deserve the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, the hostage families have recommended that he receive a Nobel Peace Prize. And certainly Netanyahu has. I have to speak as a citizen. I'm not an ambassador anymore. I don't represent the government. But far be it for me to correct the President of the United States, but he's gone on to say that he solved 7 or 8 different crises in the last 7 months of his presidency. I think he's forgetting that in 2020, he signed the Abraham Accords, which was the first Arab-Israeli peace agreement in over a quarter of a century. And just for that alone, he deserved the Nobel Peace Prize. So if you're asking me as a citizen of the State of Israel, he definitely deserves one.
All right. Ambassador Oren, thank you so very much for joining me for your perspective. We really appreciate it. Joining me now is Ruby Chen, the father of Israeli-American hostage Itay Chen. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Chen. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as we have discussed in the past, I first just want to say how sorry I am for all that your family has been through, your beloved Itay. Let's start with your reaction to this deal that has been brokered by the Trump administration, but as we've been discussing, is quite fragile.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag of emotions. Excitement that after 2 years we see the end of this, as we saw the people at the Hostage Square today, overjoyed, anticipation that indeed it does get into it gets to the finish line, but also anxiety because my family, my son Itay is one of those that are not accounted for. As a U.S. citizen, even though the U.S. have asked multiple times for Hamas to acknowledge that they have my son in their possession and be what his physical status is, and each time Hamas have not provided an answer. So we are hoping for some sort of miracle, but we understand that there's also the other option in front of us as well. But it's time. It's time after 2 years to put an end to this.
It absolutely is. And our hearts break that it's been 2 years. Can you tell us, Mr. Chen, what have these past 2 years been like for you?
It feels like we've been beamed up to a alternative universe where time, moves differently. It feels like it's just a continuous state for us, that we wake up in the morning and fight for the return of Itay that was doing what it was supposed to do. My family, a Holocaust survivor as well as my wife's. And at the age of 18, Itay could have gone to college, but he decided to join the IDF and do his time to protect the Jewish state. And he was protecting the ceasefire that was on the Gaza border. And he and his teammates, they were ambushed by Hamas. And, somehow this humanitarian crisis that has happened to the hostages got coupled with this bigger Palestinian issue that's been going on for decades. And I say that we are collateral damage of simple people that got stuck in the middle of this. And somehow we need to end this for getting the hostages out, which we are glad that the president was able to front load that piece in the agreement, but also those people in Gaza that have been used as human shields by this terrorist organization for such a long time. And there should not be a competition on pain. There's been enough pain and suffering. And I'm glad the president, with his envoys, Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Kushner, have been able to put this coalition in place and bring the parties, Hamas and Israel, to a place that they agree in context and in concept to how it's going to look like, and then they go into the details. For now, phase one, get the hostages out, then go into the details of what it exactly means to get to the finish line.
Let me just ask you, Mr. Chen, big picture. There are a lot of questions about what is going to come next. How much confidence do you have that this peace agreement will hold for the long term?
So I would divide my answer to two parts. The first part is as a father that is a U.S. citizen that wants to see his son out. I'm very focused, speaking to Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner, to keep the eye on the ball and make sure that that piece, the first piece of the hostage deal and the release of all of them happens. The second part is looking at a better good for the people. And if they don't have an alternative, they'll just go back into fighting. And those, people that are on the Hamas side, the Palestinian side, they need to figure out what do they want. All the money that they got the last 15 years, they used it not to build schools or to build hospitals. They built the war machine to attack the state of Israel. So I think they also need to decide what they want to do going forward. So a lot of moving parts. I'm not a politician. I don't get paid for that. It's above my pay grade. I just want my kid back. And as a U.S. citizen, it's unfortunate that the previous administration was not able to bring him out. This administration has been highly focused on bringing American citizens out of places such as last week, a U.S. citizen out of Afghanistan held by the Taliban was able to come out. This administration cares a lot about U.S. citizens, and I hope that Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Kushner, that are here in Jerusalem, are making sure that my son is on the top of the list and will come out as soon as possible.
Well, we so appreciate your sharing your powerful message with all of us. Thank you, Mr. Chen, and please know our thoughts continue to be with your family, particularly over these next several days.
God bless. Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much, Mr. Chen.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.